How you doing? Doing
I'm doing well.
well. We
How are
miss you
you?
down here in Miami. I feel like you're a Miami person.
I I really am a
Yeah.
Miami person. I miss it a lot.
It's nice to see you. I feel like we have a lot to catch up on. You've been on a quite a journey, and I'm excited to kind of like get up to speed with it all.
Definitely.
So,
It's been a
Sosa,
minute.
you were a first year Hammond Scholar, my first year in the OAE. So you were that first class that came in. So yeah, I
Oh,
always remember that class, especially clearly. And it seems so long ago sometimes. I don't know how that feels for you, but it
yeah,
does for me.
it definitely does. I was thinking about it today and I realized that was 5 whole years ago, but it feels like it could have
Well,
been
that was so
15. I
graduation
don't
was
know.
5 years ago, right? Yeah, so
Oh,
so add 4 more
yeah.
years to that. I mean,
Wow, that's
that's a substantial amount of time, yeah.
yeah.
So I know
Wow.
in our conversation we'll cover, or we'll get to at some point, our conversation, you and me's first conversation at your orientation when I was brand new to the office. So I know you and I texted, we had a little, a different recollection of how that conversation went. But anyway, it speaks to the
Yes.
arc you've been on and the journey you've been on, which I'm excited to share with our students now. Because I think it's important for students to know that plans change. And sometimes something that was not on your
Hmm.
radar at all at the beginning ends up being what you decide to do, which I believe is kind of the case in your situation. Yeah.
Definitely.
So kind of
Yeah.
introduce yourself, I guess, to our current students. Bring us up to speed in terms of, who you are, where you grew up, and how you ended up at the University of Miami.
Okay. So my name is Aiseosa Osaghae. I grew up mostly in Miami. I lived in Georgia for a little bit, lived in New York, but mostly grew up in Miami. And I think I decided on UM by during high school. I actually came to visit UM one year, and I kind of just remember really liking the atmosphere. I had been kind of looking for. I liked that it was a mid-sized school. I liked that it wasn't too big but not too small. And I have always been somebody that was like curious about a lot of different things. I like to learn a little bit about everything. And I remember being on UM's website and looking at all of the kinds of classes that they offered and being really excited about that. So I think that was a big part of why UM was so appealing to me. But I remember just visiting once and I was like, this is a place I think I definitely
Nice.
want
And,
to go.
and so do you remember when you learned that you received the Hammond Scholarship? What did that feel like, and what did it mean to you to be a Hammond?
That felt amazing, and I think it was everything because I don't know that I would have been able to go to UM without the Hammond Scholarship. So that was, I mean, it was everything to me.
So I'm really eager to get to that conversation that you and I had. Here's my recollection. We are in. This is
Hmm.
probably one of the first events, official events that you attended at UM. So this is in August of
Yeah.
2014. I'm only on the job in the OAE for a few weeks at that point, and I'm meeting all these new students. I know we've had Garrett Roberts on the next step in one of these types of conversations. He was in that class. I remember meeting him very vividly. And I
Hmm.
remember you were one of my advisees, and we did kind of a breakout section. This was over in the faculty apartment of Stanford. And we did like, yeah, we did like a
I
breakout
remember
session, and we were
now.
sitting in kind of a small circle. Everyone's just kind of getting to know each other. And in my mind, I vividly remember you telling me, you're sitting right next to me, and you said, I want to be maybe you didn't say ophthalmologist, but I remember something to do with being an eye doctor. And you kind of had a different
Wow.
recollection. So correct me and tell me kind of what your plans were when you first got to UM.
Yes. So I'll tell you about my plans and how they ended up changing. So I wanted to be a pediatrician. And I had been interested in medicine for a long time. When I was in high school, I loved biology. I thought I definitely wanted to be a doctor. And sometime between like that early period of like getting to college, I decided I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician. I loved working with kids. I've always been taking care of kids. Um, and so I was pre-med until my junior year at UM. And I was a bio major, but I was a foot fellow, and because I didn't have to take the gen eds, I was taking a lot of random classes. Again, I'm somebody who's interested in a little bit of everything, And so I had been taking a lot of social sciences, sociology, I was taking anthropology, but I ended up taking a lot of classes and learning about the healthcare system and just sort of like structural issues, and how they tied into issues within the healthcare system. And that sort of piqued my interest, and it kind of took me away a little bit from wanting to be a pediatrician because I felt like there were so many systemic issues with the healthcare system that I started to feel like, for me personally, being a pediatrician was not going to allow me to sort of have the kind of large scale impact I wanted to have. So that was a big part of it. Another big part of it was realizing that I was not a math person. But that was sort of the trajectory for me. I decided I didn't want to do biology anymore, and I switched to public health, but still didn't know necessarily what I wanted to do with that, until I spoke to someone who, and I can't remember the order of these, but he was either previously the director of admissions for Miami's public health master's program and had just transitioned into being the director for the law school, or the other way around. But he essentially told me about a JD and PH program. And he told me, it sounds like you're really interested in how the laws affect the healthcare system, and you can get a JD combined with a master's of public health. And I was like, wow, that sounds perfect. And that was what sort of steered me towards
That's
law
so
school.
funny to have those sort of those light bulb moments that really illuminate a path that you previously hadn't been on your radar at all.
Exactly. I never thought that that was something you could combine, but I was really glad
Yeah,
that I had
and
that
that's kind of the
conversation.
beauty of the undergraduate experience to me is that opportunity for discovery.
Exactly.
So okay, take us back to that, the first couple years of college. What were you involved in? What were some of the clubs and orgs? What do you remember about classes? Kind of what were those first few years like?
Okay. So I have been thinking about this, and it's funny because, over the years I've had to like cut down my resume because of applying for stuff, way down the line now. I'm in law school. So I don't even have access to like my college resumes, but I just remember I was doing a lot. I had to look at them to remember all of the things I was doing. I'm somebody who thrives when I'm like almost too busy. So I know I was in COPE, which I don't know if people know is the counseling outreach peer educators. And we were putting on sort of like mental health programming throughout the campus and things like that. So I was in COPE for a few years, and I was eventually like a small group leader, which meant that I just had like a leadership role in some of the programming that went on. So I was in COPE. I was in the African Student Union for a little bit. I was I worked for the athletic department for a little bit as a tutor. Um, oh, and then there's also a group called Global Brigades. So they do sort of like public health trips in different parts of the world. So I got to participate in two of those. I was also a fellow mentor. I was an orientation fellow a couple years. Um, I was in Inspire You, which was the high school mentorship program. I did that for I think 2 or 3 years. Um, what else did I do? I think that was mostly what I did. I know there was like a couple other things in there, but that's all I can remember slash what I still see on my
I would be very
resume.
impressed if you just remembered all of that stuff because a lot of times it fades away
Oh
in the
no,
background.
definitely.
Yeah.
So much of
So
it.
of all those things,
Yeah.
do any of those stand out to you as sort of like pivotal experiences or really things that kind of helped you continue to fine tune the lens through which you were looking at your future or how you wanted to be involved in the world?
Um, and sorry, it cut out for a second because I had this notification that like
Oh,
limits my time on Instagram. So, but if if I heard the question correctly, you're saying were any of these sort of like helpful in shaping that sort of
yeah, yeah.
trajectory
Were
of
any of those
change?
very impactful or influential on you?
I think so. I think that things like the Global Brigades program, for example, that that was something that cemented for me that like healthcare and public health can be so much outside of a doctor's office. And so, although I participated in two trips, but I went on one, and that trip was to Nicaragua. And what we did was we helped essentially build like septic systems in like a community in the mountain that did not have water systems connected to their bathrooms. Um, and we learned so much about how that little thing that I think a lot of people don't think about contributed to so many health issues for those communities. And so doing something like that and seeing how it can have such a health impact, it just, I think, further solidified for me that healthcare is so much more outside of a doctor's office, and there's so many other ways to sort of make that kind of public health impact. Um, and then I think things like Inspire You, that was interesting for me because um, I've always believed that, you know, education access is so important, and it ties into so much of someone's life outcomes and eventually their health outcomes too. So that was just another thing that just showed me how all of these things can be so connected. And I think I wanted to get an understanding of how the law fit into all of that and sort of figure out how I could tie it together.
So, so you graduate UM, and you didn't go directly. I remember you took at least one gap year. Is that right?
Yes, because by the time I think I hadn't even fully decided that I wanted to go to law school by the time I graduated because of the application timeline. I had to take the test shortly after I graduated. So I decided that I was just going to take a gap year. I'm pretty sure graduation was April or May, and then I know that the LSAT was in July, I think like late July. So I essentially told myself I'm going to sign up for a prep course, see how that course goes, and if I do well enough on the LSAT, then I'll apply to law school. But I also knew I was going to take a year off either way to, one, make time to take the test, and then also think through either a backup plan if the LSAT didn't go well, but also just get some work under my belt, make some money. You know, ended up doing well enough on the LSAT to apply. And then the rest of that year after taking the test, I just worked odd jobs here and there.
So I think that's really a great point to make right now, because, you know, we're coming up on the end of the semester. Over the years, I've seen seniors go through all different ranges of experiences. And I think for the student who's, you know, maybe hit this point in the year and they're still unclear of what they want to do next, you know, maybe some of their friends have jobs already, or they're getting acceptances to graduate school or professional school, and they might feel like, like I'm missing something. And I just think it's really important for them to know you don't have to have it all figured out by the time you walk across the stage. And in fact, you still had a lot of work to do.
Exactly.
You know, you weren't even like, I'm going to go to law school, just not right now. You hadn't even decided yet. So I think that's really refreshing for students.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was, for me, I mean, I'm somebody who's also just like a person of faith. And I think that was like something that really reinforced, one, my faith, but also that idea that like you don't have to have all the answers at the same time as everybody else, and things will and can still work out for you.
So tell us about the LSAT, because, you know, it's one of those tests where it kind of dictates everything in terms of law school. Not everything, but pretty close to it. So what was your prep like, and what was the experience like?
Okay, so the LSAT was interesting for me because, you know, I've always been somebody that was okay with school. I liked school. School came kind of easy for me, and I think that the LSAT was the first test where I knew that being smart was not going to be enough. The LSAT requires discipline, and that was a real test of discipline studying for that test, because, you know, people recommend something like 4 to 5 hours a day, and it's not necessarily, with the LSAT, you can't do like 30 minutes here and then 30 minutes there. That required sitting down and studying for 4 hours, which for me was a big struggle. And it was also the summer. And so you want to be out doing things with your friends and this and that, but every day I had to make sure that I got those 4 hours in. And so what I did, I also know that I struggle with self-discipline. So there were a few options. There was like an online sort of self-paced course. there was also an in-person scheduled course. I chose the in-person scheduled course because that was a way to hold me accountable to being at this place at a certain time. It actually ended up being on campus at for the summer. So it was, real easy for me. So it was an in-person class. I think it was twice a week or something like that. And the course was a month and a half. And then I remember I had maybe a week or two between the end of the course and the actual LSAT. So I was like, let me just see how this goes, get as much as I can from this course, take the test, and see what happens. But I made sure to stick to a schedule. I used Kaplan was the course that I used. And then I also bought Power Score books to supplement that. And to sort of not get bored with the studying every day, I ended up finding some of my friends who were studying for the GRE so that I could at least study next to other people and we could hold each other accountable. I studied at the different libraries on campus it helps to be around other people doing that, because when it's the summertime and you think it's a good idea to study by a pool where people are having fun, it's very easy to decide, you know what, let me just close this and enjoy the pool. So I had to keep myself around people who were doing the same thing and keep myself accountable and being disciplined.
And so were your practice tests heading to where you ended up going in terms of scoring, or what was that like? What were you expecting, I guess?
I think that Kaplan was, what the Kaplan course did was they gave you a diagnostic test in the beginning. I think there was a test in the middle of the course, and then there was a test right at the end of the course. And my actual score was 1 point off of that Kaplan. So it felt like a pretty accurate, I guess,
assessment.
Whatever the word is.
So here you are. You go from, I'm not even sure if I'm going to, if I'm interested in law school, to applying to top 14 programs, right? So what was that like? Because it had to be kind of a jarring sort of experience and also very cool. But how did you decide where to apply and how many schools to apply to, that type of thing?
Yes. So I knew I was interested in health law. And so I started by looking at what schools had a robust enough health law program that I would be able to take classes that sort of furthered my health law background and experience, but also, of course, were just good programs on their own that would sort of give me, that extra help on my resume of going to, you came from XYZ school. And the thing with law schools is that becomes so much more important than in a lot of other, industries or fields for some reason. And so I wanted to make sure that I got into a reputable law school. I did, though, apply kind of across the board as far as the rankings go, because I wanted to give myself a fair enough shot of, I'm not going to bank on nothing but, top 14 schools. So I ended up applying to 10 because I did a lot of searches on how many people typically apply to. That to me was something I saw pretty often, and it felt to me like it gave me a good enough chance. I was like, out of 10 schools, I will probably hopefully get into one. But I applied to kind of geographically all over. I applied in Houston, I applied in Boston, I applied to UM, I applied to Georgetown and GW, Emory, and University of Michigan. I think it was 10 total. I ended up getting into 8 and getting waitlisted at 2. But Georgetown was a big draw for me because they had this place called the O'Neill Institute, and it was an institute for national and global health law.
Right.
Fun fact, that's where I work now. It was the thing that drew me to Georgetown, and it's actually where I work now. But yeah, I wanted to just make sure that there was enough opportunity for me to explore my health law interests and still get just a great law degree that would make me marketable for employment after.
So tell us about law school itself, especially 1L. People will always tell you how crazy and intense it is. What's your feeling on that? What was your experience?
I will say, you kind of hear, you hear that law school is a lot of reading, and you think, okay, I've done a lot of reading before. And you think everybody's exaggerating.
Yeah.
I would say believe people. when they say it's intense. Actually, it's so funny. So to get my phone to be high enough, I have my phone stacked on two law school textbooks right now, and I wish I could show you the thickness of one of them. But you really will take in a lot of information very quickly. Um, but I think it also surprises you because you learn how much information you can take in and you can synthesize. Um, most law schools use the Socratic method, and so you'll be in a class and you've read, however many cases, and you come into class and you think you're going to get asked questions like, what was this case about? And initially, that's all the questions are. But I realized that the method in law school is more so you're getting questions on the things that weren't necessarily mentioned in the case. You're going to read a bunch of cases and see, this is what happened and this is why it turned out this way. But you're expected to take from that the underlying reasoning and then apply that to some situation you've never seen before. And that just was very different from the ways that I've learned up until that point. I think another big struggle for me was that because I came from a science background, there's always sort of like a definite answer to questions. And in law school, the joke is that the answer to every question is it depends, because it just really depends on how you argue it. If you can take the reasoning and come to, there's not necessarily always a right conclusion. It just depends on what kind of arguments you make and what you use to back them up. So that was something that was a big struggle for me because I was constantly frustrated by like, I don't know, what is the answer? And the answer kind of sometimes depended on me. But you get used to sort of the volume of information. I think that what people in law school say is that first year is kind of like, it's intense. It's a really steep learning curve. The second year is intense for different reasons. You get used to the information and then you start kind of adding on the extracurriculars. So then it's intense for your time. And then the third year, you think it's going to be a joke because, you're ready to graduate. Usually by the middle of your third year, you've lined up employment, but it's still a little bit intense, just less intense than the first 2 years.
So tell us about employment. You mentioned O'Neill Institute already. It was a draw for you to attend law school. How about working afterwards? Is that something you wanted to do from the outset or to develop along the way?
I more so thought I didn't even think initially that there was postgraduate employment available there. I thought that it was sort of like a research institute and that they mostly hired students. Until my third year, I realized that they offered a fellowship. And I think I want to stress the importance of networking too, because O'Neill was, a big draw for me. And when I first got there, I had one of my mentors there introduce me to the director of O'Neill. And I remember I had like a Zoom meeting, or maybe I actually met her in person. And we just talked about how I ended up in law school, what my interests were, my background. And we probably had that one conversation right in the beginning. And by the time I was actually in my third year applying for jobs, the deadline for O'Neill had passed already. But because of, making that connection in the beginning and her being really close to one of my mentors, I ended up still getting an interview and ended up getting the job anyway, because I just made sure to mention that, hey, I still have interest in this. And because she had spoken to me before, she knew my background, she knew my interests, and I was able to show some of the work that I had done in law school, I was still able to get that job. But I really enjoy it. They work on a variety of health law issues, and I work on two different teams, which I really like because I'm somebody who sometimes will get bored with working on just one thing at once. So I made sure to mention to them that I'm okay with
Okay, cool.
switch.
Yeah, I was going to ask what kind of work specifically you do. So can you tell us more about those two teams?
Yes. So I work on, there's an infectious diseases team, and then there's also a health and human rights initiative. And so on the infectious diseases team, they look a lot right now at HIV and hepatitis C. And there are, a bunch of different initiatives on prevention and vaccination. And then on the health and human rights side, there's sort of some sub teams within there. And I'm working on the sort of reproductive justice team. So right now that's focusing on things like the Dobbs decision and trying to figure out how doctors are being affected by it, because the Dobbs decision has just sort of caused a lot of confusion as far as where the laws stand in different states. And because in some states where abortion is banned, there are some procedures that are sort of like emergency procedures. And doctors are now afraid to perform them because they're afraid of getting criminalized in the states, or getting some sort of penalty for performing a quote abortion. And so we're trying to figure out just what kind of legal resources can be made for doctors in those situations so that patient care can be prioritized. So that's kind of the stuff that we're.
Aiseosa, it sounds like the work you're doing is super important, challenging, interesting, very meaningful. So I want to let you know I'm proud of you. This is really cool. What is
Thank
what's the
you.
future hold for you? Like, where do you see your career going in the next, say, 5 or 10 years?
So that's a good question. I think I want to, I think a lot of people who go to law school work either at a law firm or they do, a lot of people go to the law firm side, or they work for judges. Being at sort of like, it's like a nonprofit, it tends to be like a non-traditional route, but public interest broadly is something a lot of law students still do. So I see myself still being on the public interest side and doing policy work, and not necessarily your typical like courtroom lawyer. So I see myself still doing health policy, probably staying in DC because it makes a lot of sense to do health policy here. As much as I would love to probably come back to Miami sometime soon. And my parents want me to.
DC is a great city, though. DC is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been fun. So I think I'll be here for a while, probably doing health policy work for the next few years.
Very good. Aiseosa, thanks so much for getting together with me, catching up, and I appreciate you doing this. Our students will get a lot out of it.
Thank you. It was really nice
let's stay in
catching up
touch
with you after so long.
All right. See you later.
Okay.
Bye.